The church in Wellesley community has been a hub in the city for the queer community for a long time and is known for being a place to gather, socialize, celebrate, and find support. The church neighborhood was highly regarded as a safe neighborhood, known for its open and tolerant space, and the site of the Gay Pride parades. It's a place that draws many LGBTQ people from all over the world. Exactly one day after attending Pride Toronto, Andrew Kinsman disappeared near his home on Winchester Street on June 26, 2017. Several of his friends grew concerned when Andrew stopped communicating with them and gained access to his apartment on June 28th. Upon entering Andrew's home, they found no sign of a disturbance. However, they did find that their friend's cat was out of food and water. Not only did Andrew's friends know he would not leave without notifying anyone, they knew he would not leave his cat or his prescription medicines behind. Worried, his friends reported Andrew's disappearance to the Toronto Police Service. By the end of July 2017, the Toronto Police Service created a new task force called Project Prism to investigate the disappearances of Andrew and another man named Salim Essen. Fears of a serial killer stalking the LGBTQ plus community of Church in Wellesley grew on November 28th after the body of Tess Ritchie was discovered in an alleyway 4 days after being reported missing. Authorities then discovered another body in a Rosedale ravine. With 8 people missing from 2010 to 2017 and fears of a serial killer mounting, authorities held a press conference to squash the public's concerns, claiming the investigations were separate and not connected. Unfortunately, the press conference did little to comfort the community. As more and more gay men went missing, the Toronto police would launch the largest criminal investigation they had ever conducted, and led to an unlikely suspect, a middle-aged gardener and part-time mall Santa. Welcome to another episode of Crimson Sin with Tamsin Lee. I am your host, Tamsin Lee. Full show notes and sources can be found in the description. Between 2010 and 2012, 3 men went missing from the church in Wellesley area. First starting with 40-year-old Skandara, who we are going to just call Skanda. He was reported missing on September 16th, 2010. Skanda was last seen on September 6, 2010, leaving the Zippers nightclub with 2 other men around 2 a.m. Then on December 30, 2010, 44-year-old Abdul Bazir Faizi was reported missing by his cousin. Faizi was last heard from on December 29, 2010, after calling his wife to tell her that he was at work with colleagues and would be home later that evening. However, his last known whereabouts was the Steamworks, which is a bathhouse in Toronto's Gay Village. Authorities would then discover Faizi's 2002 Nissan Sentra abandoned on Moore Avenue on January 4, 2011, near the Beltline Trail, which is a small ravine that is a popular cruising spot for gay men. 1 year and 9 months later, on October 25, 2012, 58-year-old Mahid Kayen was reported missing by his son. He was last seen on October 18, 2012 by a friend. By November 2012, authorities created Project Houston, a task force that was formed to investigate the disappearances of Skanda, Faizi, and Kayen. This task force was formed when they believed Skanda had been murdered after receiving a tip from an informant. Authorities in Switzerland were contacted by an informant who was a part of an online cannibal fetish community. According to this informant, he had been chatting with a person going by the name John Jacob, who said he had recently killed and eaten a brown-skinned male from Toronto's gay village. The informant went online himself to see if there were any murder victims or missing men from Toronto's gay village. While conducting his own investigation, he found the press release about Skanda. The informant assumed that Skanda was who John Jacob was talking about and contacted authorities in Switzerland. See, this was not the first time that this informant discovered a cannibal in a different country. The informant had gained high credibility as the last time he had given similar information to authorities, it was about a cannibal in Slovakia, where they discovered a cannibal serial killer and found multiple victims around his property. Needless to say, his information about a potential cannibal in Toronto was not taken lightly. So this information the informant provided was passed on to investigators in Skanda's case, changing the case from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation. Unfortunately, Project Houston did not find the missing men. However, it did discover the username Silver Fox on the Cannibal Fetish website of a person who was located in the Toronto area. This led investigators to believe this person could possibly know something about these missing men. Silver Fox was identified as Bruce MacArthur in November 2013 and was subsequently interviewed about the missing men. MacArthur admitted to interacting with Skanda at a gay bar but denied being in a relationship. He also stated to have employed Cahan and broke off a sexual relationship with him. Classified as a witness, MacArthur was unable to provide authorities with any information about the missing persons investigations and was free to go. And with that, Project Houston concluded with no evidence to link the disappearances that crime had been committed or to identify a suspect, leaving many questions unanswered. 3 years later, men started going missing from the church in Wellesley area again. 50-year-old Suresh Mahmoodi was a South Asian male living in a suburb of Toronto with his wife when he was last seen near his home on August 14, 2015. With Mahmoodi's disappearance, authorities began to wonder if they had a serial killer on their hands. However, they also knew most of these men had not come out. There were also instances where men from the gay village would just disappear. One such instance occurred when a man from the village disappeared under similar circumstances as Skanda in 2010. But the difference was that the man turned back up in 2014. After being interviewed about his whereabouts, the man simply stated that he just wanted to get away for a while. He had moved to the other end of the city, didn't tell anyone, and left all of his belongings behind just because he wanted to disappear. Then after Mahmoodi's disappearance, 44-year-old Salim Essen seemingly vanished. Some reports claim that the last time Essen was seen was on March 20th, 2017, while others claim he was last seen on April 14th, 2017. But the men who were missing were known to go to bars and clubs in the village and were known to a lot of people. So when they went missing, everyone who frequented these locations definitely noticed. One such man whose disappearance rattled many was 44-year-old Andrew Kinsman. He was known for having a happy and upbeat personality and was described as a stable and responsible man, a superintendent of his building, and a community volunteer. Kinsman was known to have done a lot of volunteer work with queer organizations. Due to his prominence regarding social connections, his disappearance got on the media's radar. He had a group of people advocating for his disappearance to receive a high priority in the investigation. The Toronto Police Service created a new task force at the end of July 2017 called Project PRISM, which was formed to investigate the disappearance of Andrew Kinsman and Salim Essen, as well as look for any links with the unsolved disappearances investigated under Project Houston. Meanwhile, a friend and colleague of Kinsman's appealed to dating app to provide an option for users to consent to have their data released to authorities if they went missing, because authorities faced many difficulties acquiring this information due to judicial authorizations for data from servers located outside Canada. And this ultimately caused significant delays in the missing persons investigations. After Kinsman's disappearance on June 26, 2017, investigators gathered surveillance footage from the neighborhood. Authorities did not sit down to look at the video evidence until August 2017. Authorities were unsure of what they were looking for when they finally sat down to review the video evidence, but found something that jumped out almost immediately. A red Dodge Caravan circled the block twice around the time Andrew Kinsman went missing. They were also able to find the same exact vehicle on a camera a few blocks away from Andrew Kinsman's house. With this clue, authorities were able to go to the Ministry of Transportation to receive a printout of all the 2004 to 2006 red Dodge Caravans in the city of Toronto. There were over 6,000 red Dodge Caravans for authorities to comb through. But there was one more crucial clue authorities had. On the night of Andrew's disappearance, his calendar showed a name: Bruce. Looking at the over 6,000 vehicles, only 5 were registered to a person named Bruce. One of them being Bruce McArthur. Authorities definitely remembered interviewing him back in 2013 and knew he was worth looking into just one more time. Born in Lindsay, Ontario on October 8, 1951, Thomas Donald Bruce McArthur was raised on a farm in the Kawartha Lakes region of Argyll. Bruce's parents not only raised him and his sister, but also fostered troubled children from Toronto. The family often had 6 to 10 of these children in their home at any given time, and was said to have a good reputation in the area. Bruce's mother and father were devout in their religious beliefs. His mother was an Irish Catholic, his father a Scottish Presbyterian. Growing up in a deeply religious household, Bruce felt his father possibly sensed his homosexuality, but this also caused him to have trouble accepting his own sexual orientation, which would have been considered abnormal at that point in time. During his school years, classmates stated that Bruce did not fit in with others. In high school, he attended Fenelon Falls Secondary School, where he met his future wife, Janice Campbell. Both graduated from high school in 1970, with Bruce graduating from a program in general business. The couple married in 1974. Bruce McArthur started working at an Eaton's department store in Toronto sometime around 1973 as a buyer's assistant. During the mid-1970s, Bruce's father was diagnosed with a brain tumor and was sent to a nursing home. Troubles with his family seemed to become worse as he witnessed his mother taking an interest in another man while her husband was in this nursing home. Seeing this, Bruce became much closer with his father. His mother died of cancer in 1978, with his father following in 1981. So in 1978, Bruce left his position as a buyer's assistant and started working as a traveling salesman for McGregor Socks, where he would solicit department stores to carry his merchandise. He later found employment as a merchandising representative for a garment company called Stanfield's. Bruce and his wife Janice moved into a house in Oshawa in 1979. They began growing their family, having a daughter and a son by 1981. Even though he was leading a heterosexual life, his homosexual tendencies were still just beneath the surface. To bury these feelings, Bruce became very active in his church and kept himself busy. It wouldn't be until the early 1990s that Bruce finally gave in to these feelings and started having affairs with men. More than a year later, he was honest with his wife that he was gay. But they continued to live with each other until 1997, when Bruce moved to Toronto because of the gay community there. At Toronto's gay village, Bruce frequented the bars of Church and Wellesley. He moved into an apartment while being in a 4-year relationship with another man. When they broke up and his divorce was in the process of being finalized, Bruce sought help from a psychiatrist who prescribed him Prozac for several months. It was during this time that Bruce started his career as a landscaper. Things appeared to be looking up for Bruce as he no longer had to hide his true identity. After years and years of repression, he was more than excited to explore this new world. But things took a turn. On the afternoon of October 31st, 2001, Bruce was invited inside of actor and model Mark Henderson's apartment to see his Halloween costume. Bruce struck the actor several times from behind with an iron pipe that he was carrying. Mark fought his attacker before he lost consciousness. When he came back to, he immediately called 911 and was transported to St. Michael's Hospital, receiving several stitches to his head and fingers. He also needed 6 weeks of physiotherapy. While the assault case was pending in 2002, Bruce registered with a gay fetish dating website for men who were into BDSM called Recon. He noted on his profile that he had an interest in submissive men. He was also active on numerous gay dating websites including Grindr, Bear411, ManJam, among many others. After the assault, Bruce turned himself in but claimed he could not remember the attack, pleading guilty to charges of assault with a weapon and assault causing bodily harm. Bruce McArthur received a conditional sentence of 729 days on April 11, 2003. A charge of carrying a concealed weapon was withdrawn at the time. Initially, the Crown believed jail time was warranted for the offense, but agreed to a conditional sentence after psychiatric and pre-sentencing reports suggested that he was at a low risk to offend again, receiving 2 years probation. There were also concerns that Bruce's behavior that night may have been due to the combination of this anti-seizure medication mixed with a muscle relaxant, which is sometimes taken recreationally before sex. Avoiding jail time, Bruce would spend the first year of his sentence under house arrest, followed by a 6-month curfew and 3 years probation. During his probation, Bruce was not allowed to visit the gay area of Toronto except for work and medical appointments. He had to stay at least 33 feet from Henderson's home or workplace and could not spend time with male prostitutes. He was also not allowed to possess firearms for 10 years, could not purchase, possess, or consume drugs without a medical prescription, and was barred from possessing the muscle relaxant he consumed the day of the attack. Bruce also had to submit his DNA to a database as well as take psychological and psychiatric counseling, including anger management. With all of these conditions, a defense lawyer pointed out that it appeared the judge was concerned Bruce posed a danger. But even with these stipulations in place, a retired detective allegedly stated that parole conditions at that time were unenforceable, were not publicized, and parole violators were only caught if they attracted police attention. So really, the conditions were kind of useless. While he was banned from visiting Toronto's gay village, Bruce immersed himself in the church, appearing to be very religious. All the while, men from the gay village were going missing. Bruce McArthur was granted a record suspension in 2014 on the 2003 conviction, which expunged the incident from his record. Most records and exhibits from the case were destroyed in 2010 in compliance with Toronto Police Service's retention policy. In 2011, Bruce joined Facebook, and by this time he re-established himself in Toronto's gay community, where he regularly visited gay bars, which could be seen on his social media profile. There were many pictures of him enjoying the local nightlife with younger men of South Asian or Middle Eastern descent. While he was able to successfully rejoin the community, Bruce's banishment from Church in Wellesley over the 2001 assault remained well known amongst many. He also developed a reputation for BDSM and rough sex. Also in talks was his volatile temper. In 2011, Bruce was asked to leave a coffee house, and his reaction was very memorable. According to sources, Bruce immediately became red and screamed slurs, stating the gay community was spreading stories about him. A Toronto restaurant owner recalled a time in 2013 when Bruce came in without his boyfriend. The owner asked him about it, to which Bruce stated he was on vacation. The restaurant owner told Bruce, he had seen him the previous day, and Bruce was just angry and left the restaurant to never return. A colleague who helped install water features on 3 of Bruce McArthur's landscaping business projects recalled that Bruce was always accompanied by an older white man who he seemed to have been romantically involved with, as well as a day laborer who was usually of Southeast Asian or Middle Eastern descent. Most of Bruce's clients were wealthy elderly women who found him to be very charming. He also built a client base through personal recommendations. As landscaping is more of a summertime career, wintertime proved to be quite slow financially for Bruce. This is when you could find him portraying Santa Claus at Agincourt Mall and making floral gifts for charities. Bruce's son reportedly had a difficult time accepting his father's sexuality. His son was sentenced to 14 months in jail in 2014 after making multiple obscene phone calls to a woman. He was released on bail in order to live with his father and assist with his landscaping business. During his stay, one of the son's friends happened to visit and noticed that Bruce's bathroom was decorated with photos of naked East Indian men. Between 2010 and 2016, no one suspected that Bruce McArthur was linked to the tales of missing men from around the area. But in 2016, Bruce had become a suspect, and he could feel the walls closing in on him. In the days following the announcement of Project Prism, he got rid of his red Dodge Caravan. But authorities had Bruce under surveillance and were able to recover the van from the wrecking yard to be forensically examined. In the back of the van, investigators discovered blood, which was eventually identified as belonging to Andrew Kinsman, instantly changing the case from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation and linking Bruce to that murder. Bruce lived on the 19th floor of an apartment building, so keeping an eye on him wasn't exactly easy. Authorities needed to know who his associates were and his normal routine as they waited for a warrant to enter his apartment to collect evidence from his computer. Investigators believed that if all of the missing persons cases were actually murders, then there was no way Bruce was committing them on his own. Finally, authorities had their chance in December to go into Bruce's apartment they were only able to clone 45% of his computer before the surveillance team notified investigators that Bruce was headed back to the apartment. But that 45% gave investigators over 100,000 images from websites, emails, personal photographs, as well as over 1 million artifacts of websites visited and emails sent that they have to dig through. Investigators discovered Bruce created a folder for each of his victims. In these folders were photographs of the victims when they were alive, taken of them on camping trips, during visits or outings, and other relationship-type photos. But there were also pictures where the victims were posed post-mortem. Authorities also found images of men who they had no idea who they were, because they were never reported missing. Such was the case for one man named Kumar Kanagartnam. Because they had no idea who he was, they had to release some of the photographs to the media to identify him. But this showed just how Bruce chose his victims, as he specifically chose 37-year-old Kumar because very few would miss him. He was a refugee from Sri Lanka who arrived in Vancouver in August 2010 with 492 other Tamil refugees. When his deportation order was given, Kumar went into hiding in the Tamil community in Ontario and worked as a cleaner and mover. The last he had contact with his family was in August 2015. Another victim was Dean Lizowick. He was a resident of the shelter system in Toronto and was never reported missing. On January 18, 2018, authorities were surveilling Bruce McArthur when they decided to apprehend him after seeing a young man enter his apartment at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Believing the man was at risk, they rushed up to Bruce's apartment and arrested him. Officers found the young man, whom Bruce met through a dating app, restrained on a bed. The man agreed to be handcuffed to the steel bed frame, but before authorities interrupted, Bruce had put a black bag over the man's head and tried to tape his mouth shut. Authorities seized 5 cell phones, 5 computers, 3 digital cameras, and about a dozen USB flash drives from Bruce's apartment. Evidence found on these devices helped investigators charge him with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the presumed deaths of Andrew Kinsman and Salim Essen. While they did not have their bodies, investigators believed they had a pretty good idea on how the victims were slain. Authorities also believed at the time of his arrest that Bruce McArthur was responsible for the deaths of other men. To identify these victims, the Toronto Police Service had to coordinate with other police agencies to trace the perpetrator's whereabouts and his online activity. The Ontario Provincial Police, the Ontario Forensic Pathology Service, and the Centre of Forensic Sciences helped in the searches of Bruce's apartment and his Leaside property. And by the end of January, the case saw hundreds of officers involved, as well as 30 properties being searched. At the end of February, the investigation was broadened to outstanding murder cases, hundreds of missing persons cases, and sudden death occurrences, coordinating with other Canadian and international forces. On January 18th, authorities executed search warrants at 5 properties associated with Bruce McArthur, 4 of which were in Toronto, while the other was in Madoc, Ontario, and was the residence of a landscaper and longtime friend of Bruce's. Another property searched was the condominium of one of Bruce's ex-boyfriends. However, authorities were more concerned about searching Bruce's high-rise apartment in Thorncliffe Park and the residence in Leaside where he stored his landscaping equipment. The owners of the Leaside property were barred from their home to allow time for a forensic search. The search extended to an adjacent ravine with the help of cadaver dogs and a rescue team. The cadaver dogs took an interest in large planter boxes on the property. On January 19th, as it was wintertime, the planters were frozen to the ground, so authorities had to use heaters to thaw them to remove them. On January 29th, authorities announced they found the dismembered skeletal remains of at least 3 people in 2 of the 12 planters. Even though the remains were not identified, investigators gathered enough evidence to charge Bruce with an additional 3 counts of first-degree murder in the presumed deaths of Mahi Kayan, Suresh Mahmoodi, and Dean Lizowick. This prompted investigators to seize planters from across the city. Authorities announced on February 8th that they had found the remains of 3 more victims at the Leaside residence, and that one of the 6 sets of remains was Andrew Kinsman. MacArthur was charged for a 6th count of first-degree murder in the death of Skanda on February 23rd. His remains and those of Mahmoodi were identified through dental records and had been recovered from planters at the Leaside residence. By the end of February, the scope of the investigation was expanded, with authorities receiving tips from around the world, including countries where Bruce had vacationed. In the meantime, the investigation continued at the Leaside property for more than 3 weeks, garnering the name Ground Zero, and police establishing a command post on the property. Forensic investigators spent hundreds of hours thoroughly searching Bruce MacArthur's apartment. It took them several weeks to make their way to his bedroom, where they expected to find most of their evidence. It took them 4 months to finish searching the apartment, where they seized more than 18,000 photographs and over 1,800 items, making this the largest forensic investigation conducted by the Toronto Police Service. The Toronto Police held a press conference on March 5th, releasing a photo of an unidentified deceased male who was potentially another one of Bruce's victims. Authorities received over 500 tips regarding the picture and were checking on 22 potential identities. They also announced that a 7th set of remains had been discovered from the Leaside planters. Bruce was charged with a 7th count of first-degree murder on April 11th in the death of Abdul Bazir Faizi. At this point in the investigation, he was charged with the deaths of all 5 men from Project Houston and Project Prism. 5 days later, Bruce was charged with an 8th count of first-degree murder in the death of Kumar Kanagartnam. A source had stated that Bruce covered his tracks using aliases online, using payphones, and avoiding areas with surveillance cameras. This source also suggested that he targeted vulnerable men who did not have a fixed address or who had not told their families that they were gay. But the investigators were not finished with these searches. They planned to return to the 30 properties in April or May when the frozen ground had thawed. Authorities were particularly interested in returning to the Leaside residence as they had previously uncovered bodies there. But additional tip-offs would cause the amount of properties authorities had to search to grow from 30 to 100. By the second week of May, a team of 7 cadaver dogs were searching the properties. Between July 4th and July 13th, 20 police investigators conducted excavations in the forested ravine behind the Leaside property. They collected human remains almost every day during this search. On July 20th, authorities announced that the remains found belonged to Kayan and concluded that all of the remains of MacArthur's alleged victims had been identified. Authorities stated that they had no evidence suggesting that Bruce MacArthur was connected to any other deaths. However, there was an investigation still underway into 15 homicide cold cases linked to the gay village dating between 1975 and 1997 for a possible connection to MacArthur. October 2018, homicide detectives stated that they had not yet found any links between the cold cases and Bruce. After Bruce MacArthur's arrest back in January 2018, there was a publication ban on court proceedings, limiting what could be reported in the media. He was being detained at the Toronto South Detention Center, where it was reported on March 19, 2018, that he was being held in segregation and under suicide watch. A judicial pretrial was scheduled for June 20th, 2018, which was closed to the public. During this pretrial, the Crown, defense lawyers, and a judge were set to address issues that could possibly resolve the case without a trial. Several media outlets applied for the release of the psychiatric and pre-sentencing reports from Bruce McArthur's 2003 assault conviction. An attorney for Bruce was against the release of this information, claiming that it could risk his fair trial rights. However, Justice Leslie Chaplin believed the reports shone a more positive light on the suspect and released them. Also released to the media to view, but not publish, were photographs of the victim's injuries and the weapon used. Bruce McArthur waived his right to a preliminary hearing on October 22nd and first appeared at the Superior Court of Justice on November 5, 2018. On January 29, 2019, Bruce pled guilty to each of the 8 first-degree murder charges. Crown Attorney Mike Cantlin read from an agreed statement of fact details of the killings taking place in Toronto between 2010 and 2017. It stated that each murder was either premeditated or involved other crimes, which qualified them as first-degree murder, with 6 being sexual in nature and 5 including confinement. Cantlin continued that Bruce kept trophies from his victims, including jewelry and a notebook. There was also DNA from 4 of the victims found in his van. Bruce would then take hundreds of post-mortem photographs of his victims with ropes around their necks or nude in a fur coat or hat. Some pictures showed the victims with their heads and beards shaved, with Bruce keeping their hair in Ziploc bags in a shed near Mount Pleasant Cemetery. One photograph depicted a rope around a victim's neck twisted with a metal bar wrapped in tape. The bar was discovered in Bruce McArthur's van and contained the DNA of Andrew Kinsman and Essen. His sentencing hearing began on February 4, 2019. Due to a 2011 change to the criminal code which affected 6 of McArthur's murders, the Crown requested a 50-year parole ineligibility for the enormity of McArthur's crimes, his lack of remorse, the betrayals upon his victims, the effect of his crimes on the community, and how he had been a danger up to his arrest. However, Bruce's attorney argued such a sentence would be unduly harsh, given his client's age, and noted that he had waived a preliminary hearing and pled guilty, ultimately benefiting all involved in the proceedings. Bruce McArthur was sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole eligibility for 25 years. McArthur can apply for parole when he is 91. However, it is highly unlikely that it would be granted. Many believe it would be unlikely for Bruce McArthur to live that long, as he is overweight with type 2 diabetes. The investigation and media coverage over the case drew a lot of controversy, with many accusing the Toronto police of indifference toward the LGBTQ, racial, and homeless persons. Many gay activists and editorial writers suggested that authorities only looked at the disappearances seriously when a white man, Andrew Kinsman, was reported missing. Authorities denied these allegations, noting that Project Houston was a bigger investigation. It was also established that while Kinsman's disappearance in June 2017 was important to the formation of Project Prism, this was due to the evidence they had obtained in July, and not due to the victim's race. News outlets combed through hundreds of pages of partially redacted court orders that were unsealed in September 2018 to find that there had been a considerable effort toward investigating all 3 Project Houston victims. However, many still suggest that racism was involved, as there was a relatively low response to the disappearances of the brown-skinned men in contrast to the disappearance of Kinsmen. There was also talks that Bruce McArthur was initially overlooked as a suspect because he was white. But authorities stated that initially they theorized their suspect was a person of color, like the victims, because serial killers tend to target familiar communities. Whether racism actually was or was not involved is up for debate, but seeing as how long it took them to review evidence and such, I think that it fell on them lacking in investigating in a timely manner. And with a lot of serial killer cases, the detectives actually end up speaking to the serial killer more than once. They usually let them go and then they're like, oh my gosh, his name popped up again. So I don't know. What do you think of today's case? Do you think racism was involved or police incompetence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening and your support. Stay safe, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.